My grandfather left me a $100 million inheritance. When my daughter-in-law found out, she tried to take my money, but she had no idea how it would end. The news came on a quiet morning, one that had begun like any other, with the sun filtering through my curtains and the distant hum of the city below. My grandfather, the man who had raised me after my parents died, had passed away in his sleep. Even at 68, I felt the familiar pang of loss tighten around my chest. He had been a man of immense presence, respected, feared in business circles, and deeply loved by those who truly knew him. I remember sitting in his study for the last time, the smell of leather-bound books and polished wood filling the room. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now rested peacefully in the memory of someone who had controlled empires and inspired loyalty with a mere glance. And then the papers, his will. I had always known I was his only legal heir, the one he trusted to manage his wealth with the same care and diligence he had shown all his life. $100 million, neatly documented, a testament to a life of work and meant to secure the future for me alone. For a moment, the enormity of it overwhelmed me. The money was not simply currency, it was trust, responsibility, a legacy that bound our family together even beyond death. I felt honored, yet the weight of it pressed on my shoulders. I had always respected my grandfather's wishes, and now I was the steward of everything he had built. But shadows, I would soon learn, lurk even in moments of inheritance. I had no reason to suspect betrayal at first. The funeral had passed quietly, attended by a handful of family members and old associates. Yet beneath polite smiles and condolences, I began to sense tension, subtle but sharp. My daughter-in-law, Livia, had arrived late, her eyes scanning the room not with grief but with calculation. There was something in her posture, the flick of her hands, the way she whispered into her husband's ear, that hinted at a storm I could not yet name. That storm revealed itself in the days following the funeral. My grandfather's estate had been entrusted to my lawyers, and I expected to receive the usual confirmations, documentation, and transfers. Instead, I received silence. Calls went unanswered, emails returned with cryptic messages, and soon I discovered the unimaginable. My accounts had been frozen, my name removed from the beneficiary list, and a new will, one I had never seen, had appeared, granting my inheritance to parties I had never trusted. I stared at the documents in disbelief. The bold signature at the bottom, dated suspiciously after my grandfather's passing, carried the seal of deceit. My heart raced, not with fear, but with the fierce fire of someone wronged. I had been betrayed, not by strangers, but by someone I had trusted to love and respect me. Livia had discovered the inheritance before anyone else, had quietly involved her lawyers, and had moved with calculated precision to displace me. I clenched the papers in my hands, feeling the weight of every promise broken. The money, the legacy, the trust, it all seemed to hang in the air, almost tangible, yet stolen by her cunning. Even as the initial shock passed, anger rose within me, not blind anger, but a measured, determined fury. Livia believed I was old, that I was weak, that I could be fooled and pushed aside. She underestimated me. At 68, I had lived long enough to see the world's cruelties, and I had learned that cunning could be met with equal cunning. I knew then, sitting alone in my apartment surrounded by the silence of betrayal, that this was only the beginning. I would reclaim what was mine, not through haste or fury, but through strategy, determination, and the knowledge that justice had always favored those who refused to be cowed. And so, with the will in my hands, I began to plan. It was astonishing how quickly Livia moved, how quietly she orchestrated her plan while the world around her believed she was mourning. She had learned of my inheritance before anyone else, a detail whispered to her by one of my grandfather's distant associates, someone she knew could be swayed with flattery or money. From that moment, she began maneuvering with the precision of a chess master, each step calculated, each word measured to ensure I would not see the trap until it had snapped shut. I first noticed the irregularities when my lawyers, who had always been prompt and meticulous, stopped returning my calls. Emails went unanswered, letters were met with vague excuses. At first, I attributed it to the chaos that always follows a death, especially one as significant as my grandfather's. But then the documents arrived. A new will, purportedly signed and notarized, claiming I was no longer capable of managing the inheritance. Livia's name appeared prominently, along with a network of lawyers who were suddenly representing her interests. My name, the name I had trusted to carry the legacy forward, was gone entirely. I read the document over and over, each word hitting me like a cold blade. She had used the guise of concern, "You are old, Carolina, it's too much for you," to justify the theft, presenting herself as a protector while she quietly removed me from the estate. The audacity made my blood boil. She had laughed at me on the phone, her voice smooth and honeyed, yet dripping with contempt. "Carolina, you've lived a long life," she said mockingly. "Do you really need all that money? You'll never manage it. Let me handle it. It's better for everyone this way." Her words were meant to wound, to belittle, to remind me that I was supposedly frail and incapable. But I felt only a surge of clarity. At 68, I had managed businesses, investments, and crises far beyond what most 20-year-olds could dream of. I had survived loss, betrayal, and hardship. Livia's attempt to diminish me was futile. I knew immediately that I could not rely solely on the papers in my hand or the shaky promises of lawyers who had already been compromised. I needed to reach further, to uncover the truth behind the supposed new will, and to expose the entire deception. There was cunning in Livia's approach. Her lawyers had prepared a network of falsified documents, deadlines, and fake witnesses. But cunning can be undone by sharper cunning, and I had years of experience in strategy, negotiation, and reading people. Sitting in my living room late into the night, I began making lists, gathering contacts, and tracing every transaction related to the inheritance. Every bank account, every notary, every legal filing would have to be scrutinized. I knew Livia had underestimated me. She believed age had made me passive, obedient, and weak. She had assumed she could erase me from history as easily as one erases a name from a document. The fire inside me burned steadily, a slow, consuming determination. I would fight her with every resource available, with every connection my grandfather and I had nurtured over decades. I would not only reclaim the inheritance, I would restore the dignity she had tried to strip from me. By the end of that night, I had resolved to reach out to my grandfather's closest friend, a man who had witnessed the entirety of the estate's growth and knew every detail. If anyone could provide insight into the true will and the intentions behind it, it would be him. I also began documenting every interaction with Livia, recording the lies, the insults, and her attempts at manipulation. Every phone call, every letter, every word would become a weapon in the fight to come. Livia may have thought she had cornered me, that she had manipulated the old and frail heir, but she was about to learn the harsh reality of underestimating a woman who had survived life's cruelties and emerged stronger each time. It was a quiet Thursday morning when I first tried to access my accounts. I had planned to review some of the investments my grandfather had left me, to make sure everything was in order, to remind myself that at least one part of his legacy still felt tangible. Instead, I was met with a wall of impossibility. The screens displayed messages that made my blood run cold: account frozen, beneficiary no longer valid, and access denied. At first, I thought it was a technical error. Perhaps the banks were updating their systems, perhaps some paperwork had been misplaced. I called my lawyers immediately, expecting swift explanations, confirmations, reassurance. But every call ended the same way: voicemail, busy signals, or the dreaded silence. My emails went unanswered, letters returned marked undeliverable. Every lifeline I thought I had was severed, leaving me staring at the stark truth. Livia had moved quickly, quietly, and without hesitation. The depth of her deceit struck me like a physical blow. The new will, purportedly signed, notarized, and legally binding, had replaced the documents my grandfather had left. My name had disappeared from every official record. Even the people I had trusted to protect my interests, the lawyers who had handled my grandfather's estate, had become unreachable, compromised, or perhaps intimidated into silence. I felt the weight of the century I had lived. Betrayal has a unique sting when it comes from those closest to you. I had raised my family, nurtured relationships, and trusted those who claimed loyalty. Yet Livia, cunning and cruel, had turned every system, every document, and every human connection into a trap. Anger, sharp and precise, replaced despair. I would not be reduced to tears and helplessness. I had faced life's cruelties before: financial crises, business deceptions, the loss of friends and family. I had always emerged with my dignity intact. This would be no different. I called Livia, my voice steady despite the turmoil roiling inside me. "We need to talk," I said, each word deliberate. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the smooth, honeyed tone I had come to recognize as her weapon. "Carolina," she said, almost mockingly, "you've had a long life. Surely you don't need all of that money. You wouldn't know what to do with it. Let me take care of it. It's better this way." I could hear her laughter, sharp and cruel. She believed she had won, that she had humiliated me completely. Her words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. She had underestimated me at every turn, assuming that age made me weak, that I would be intimidated, that I would vanish quietly while she rewrote reality. I hung up and began making calls to every trusted associate my grandfather had left me, former business partners, old friends, and advisors. Every conversation was carefully conducted, each detail scrutinized, each lead followed. I began tracking accounts, verifying signatures, cross-referencing dates. The extent of her fraud was vast, but it was not infallible. Livia had acted hastily, arrogantly, leaving traces that a careful, determined heir could uncover. By evening, I had begun constructing a map of deceit, a network of evidence that traced every manipulated document, every frozen account, every attempt to remove me from the inheritance. Each piece of evidence was a step toward reclaiming what was mine. Each realization a reinforcement that I was not powerless. I pored over the records long into the night, eyes burning from hours of meticulous examination. This was not just a fight for money. It was a fight for justice, for dignity, for the right to honor my grandfather's intentions. Livia had assumed that her meanness, her cunning, and her arrogance could override decades of truth and trust. She was about to learn that deception has weaknesses, and I had the patience and skill to exploit them. By the time I finally closed my eyes that night, the anger that had surged within me had transformed into focus. I would reclaim my inheritance, not through rash decisions, but through strategy, precision, and relentless determination. Livia had started a battle she could not win. The phone felt heavy in my hand, an instrument that would carry every ounce of my resolve across the distance to the woman who had tried to erase me. I had rehearsed what I would say, though I knew that no rehearsal could capture the intensity of the truth I was about to deliver. Livia had believed she could belittle me, that she could use age and perceived frailty as weapons against me, but she had miscalculated. When the line clicked and her voice came through, smooth and deliberately mocking, I felt a flash of anger. "Carolina," she said, the sing-song lilt of her tone designed to irritate, "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Are you calling about your old inheritance?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and spoke, calm but firm. I am calling to remind you that what you took from me belongs to me. You have manipulated documents, frozen accounts, and tried to remove me entirely from my grandfather's estate, but it will not succeed. There was a pause on the other end, a slight hitch in her voice I had not anticipated. She recovered quickly, a false laugh spilling through the line. "Oh, Carolina," she said, her tone sugary and condescending, "you are old. You don't need all that money. Really, it's better for everyone if I manage it. You've had your chance. Now it's time to step aside." Her words were meant to sting, to humiliate, but I felt none of it. Instead, I allowed my voice to sharpen, to carry the weight of decades of experience, resilience, and intelligence. "You've underestimated me, and that is your mistake," I said. "You have made a series of decisions, illegal and deceitful ones. I have gathered evidence of every action you have taken: falsified documents, frozen accounts, fraudulent legal claims. You cannot hide behind your charm or your lies." I could hear her inhale sharply. She paused, the condescension faltering for a fraction of a second. I pressed on, my voice calm, deliberate, and cutting through her pretense. "I have contacted my grandfather's old associates, traced every account, every signature. Your actions are exposed. You will return what you took, and you will do so in full. I am not asking. I am informing you that your deception has failed and the consequences will follow." The line went silent for a moment, her carefully constructed confidence cracking ever so slightly. Then, in a softer tone, almost pleading, she said, "Carolina, we can talk about documents, about arrangements. Surely there is a way to resolve this without scandal." I laughed softly, a sound devoid of malice, but full of triumph. "There is no arrangement that benefits you, Livia. You tried to erase me, to belittle me, and to steal what was never yours. I will accept nothing short of a full return of everything you manipulated, plus the recognition of what is rightfully mine." I could hear her swallow, the air tense on the other end of the line. The laughter, the mockery, the false sweetness, all gone, replaced by the faint tremor of fear. She realized, finally, that she had awakened a force she could not control, that I was not the frail, obedient heir she had hoped for. I hung up a phone slowly, letting the silence linger in the room around me. I felt a wave of satisfaction, tempered with the cool, precise calm of someone who knows the battle is not yet over, but whose advantage is undeniable. Livia had been confronted, exposed, and forced to reckon with a truth she had not anticipated: that age is not weakness, and that cunning, when met with skill and resolve, can be undone. Sitting back in my chair, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The fight was far from finished, but I had set the tone, established the boundaries, and shown that I would not be intimidated. Livia's schemes, her insults, her attempts at humiliation, they had all been met with clarity, strategy, and strength. The path ahead was still steep, the legal battles looming, the documents to reclaim, the accounts to restore, but I was ready. And for the first time in days, I felt the surge of confidence that comes not from hope, but from certainty. I will reclaim what was mine, and justice will follow in its wake. The following morning, I arranged a meeting with one of my grandfather's oldest friends, a man who had managed much of the family's wealth and who knew every transaction, every contract, every subtle detail of the estate. His office smelled of polished wood and leather, a comforting familiarity that reminded me of afternoons spent learning about business matters under my grandfather's watchful eye. When I explained the situation, his brow furrowed in concern. "Carolina," he said gravely, "this goes far beyond what you've seen in the so-called new will.
Livia has not only attempted to seize your inheritance, she has neglected the responsibilities that come with it. Your grandfather's estate carries obligations, debts, business investments, ongoing commitments. She will be held liable for mismanagement and fraudulent claims. He paused, then pulled a folder from the shelf. Inside were documents I had never seen: ledgers, contracts, letters, financial statements. My eyes widened as I read. Alongside the $100 million inheritance I was legally entitled to, there was a debt, $200 million, that the rightful heir also had the power to reclaim. Livia, in her arrogance and greed, had tried to manipulate both sides, claiming ownership while leaving obligations unpaid. She had no legal standing, and now the law was on my side. A thrill of quiet triumph surged through me. The scale of the reversal became clear. Not only could I reclaim what was mine, but Livia was now liable for enormous financial restitution. The imbalance she had tried to create was about to collapse under the weight of her own misdeeds. I spent the next days meticulously assembling every piece of evidence, combining my grandfather's original directives, the bank statements, and legal records with the testimony of his old associates. Each document, each signature, each notarized page built an unassailable case. Livia's lawyers tried to contact me, offering settlements, delays, and negotiations, but I refused. I had no interest in compromise. I sought justice, clarity, and restoration. Finally, I called Livia. My voice was calm, measured, carrying the authority that had been earned through decades of life and experience. "You owe more than you realized," I said, simply. "Not just the inheritance you attempted to take, but the obligations that have accrued through your deception. You must return everything or face the consequences." There was silence on the other end, followed by a stammered reply I barely recognized as defiance. "Carolina, surely—" "No," I interrupted firmly. "There is no surely here. You were reckless, deceitful, and cruel. Now you will face the results. Prepare to restore everything. I have the law, the evidence, and the truth on my side. You cannot escape this." The confrontation was brief but decisive. I hung up, feeling the weight of power shift back into my hands. In those quiet moments, I understood that the inheritance was not just about money. It was about control, respect, and justice. I had been tested, underestimated, and belittled, but now the outcome was clear. Over the next several weeks, restitution began. Accounts were unfrozen, assets returned, and debts reassigned to Livia. Every step was meticulously documented, every transaction verified. The magnitude of what was restored was staggering, not just financially, but emotionally. I had reclaimed my grandfather's legacy, my rightful place as heir, and the integrity of his estate. And through it all, Livia's power waned. Her arrogance, her deceit, her attempts at humiliation had all crumbled under the precise weight of law, evidence, and unyielding resolve. By the time I finally closed the folder containing the last restored document, I leaned back in my chair and let out a deep breath. The fight had been exhausting, every day a test of patience and endurance, but the results were undeniable. The inheritance was mine, the debts corrected, and justice had been restored. I felt a profound sense of vindication. Livia's attempts to manipulate, humiliate, and cheat me had failed completely. I had proven not just to her, but to myself, that age and experience are not weaknesses. They are tools, weapons of resilience, and instruments of justice. I was no longer merely an heir. I was the rightful steward of my grandfather's legacy, the guardian of his wishes, and the one who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. And in that moment, I allowed myself a rare smile, a quiet, satisfied acknowledgement that the battle was almost over. The weeks that followed were a lesson in the inevitability of consequences. Livia, who had once walked through life with a smug confidence, now moved through the world weighed down by the very schemes she had tried to wield against me. Her arrogance, her deception, her underestimation of my resolve, all of it had led to a reckoning she could no longer escape. News came gradually, in fragments at first. A lawyer from her own circle reached out, cautiously, offering arrangements, hoping to negotiate before the full extent of her financial liability became public. I refused to speak to them. There was no negotiation to be had. Every fraudulent action, every falsified document, every stolen asset had to be corrected. Livia would have to face the results in full. It was not long before the bankruptcy filings appeared in the public records. She owed far more than she could repay, her attempts to cover her tracks collapsing under the weight of legal scrutiny. The $100 million inheritance I had reclaimed was just part of it. The additional $200 million in debts, which she had tried to ignore, loomed over her like a storm cloud she could not escape. I watched the news quietly, feeling no malice, only the calm satisfaction of justice fulfilled. Livia had been cunning, yes, but her cunning relied on my presumed weakness. She had assumed that age would make me passive, that experience would not guide my hand. She had been catastrophically wrong. With her bankruptcy finalized, Livia's world had changed completely. Assets she had claimed, homes she had purchased, businesses she had attempted to manipulate, all were frozen, reassigned, or seized. Friends who had once admired her charm now regarded her with distance or disdain. Her carefully constructed image of control and superiority had crumbled entirely. Meanwhile, I moved forward with my life, unburdened by fear or malice. My inheritance, fully restored, allowed me to live comfortably, to travel, and to invest in causes and people I cared about. More importantly, it gave me peace, a reassurance that I could face the future with dignity and security. I spent mornings in my study, reading, reflecting, and managing my affairs with the same meticulous care my grandfather had taught me. Afternoons were for friends, leisurely walks, and quiet moments of joy. Evenings were spent in my garden, watching the sunset over the city, each day a testament to resilience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. Livia's downfall was not something I celebrated with glee. It was rather a natural consequence of her choices, a demonstration that deceit, arrogance, and cruelty cannot withstand the steady hand of truth and persistence. I had fought not only for money, but for justice, for recognition, and for the restoration of what was rightfully mine. And the law, coupled with my resolve, had delivered it. By the time I sat in my sunlit apartment, the chaos of the battle behind me, I felt a deep, serene joy. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and deceit, and had emerged not only unscathed, but triumphant. My grandfather's legacy was secure, my dignity intact, and my life my own to live fully and freely. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile without restraint. Livia had been undone by her own meanness, and I had been vindicated by patience, intelligence, and unyielding resolve. The inheritance, the justice, and the peace I now enjoyed were more than money. They were proof that age does not diminish strength, and that cunning, when met with equal cunning and unwavering determination, will ultimately fail. I poured myself a cup of tea, feeling the warmth spread through me, and looked out the window at the bustling city below. Everything I had fought for, everything I had defended, was finally mine, not just in law, but in truth. I was free, I was respected, and I was victorious. And in that moment, I rejoiced fully, without reservation.